Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Sorry about that delay. As I mentioned earlier, we were actually just waiting on the live stream, which should be working now. Yeah, do that to me. Okay, cool. This mic is pretty hot, so hopefully I'm not too loud, but for any of you, a couple guys in the back, there's still seats over here if anyone needs it. And please finish off the pizza so we don't have to take any home. Thanks for coming out. By show of hands, how many people are new to the meetup tonight? A lot of people, that's awesome. Sorry, you guys, you must be just D3 enthusiasts, I guess. I think this is pretty much our record for attendance, which is great. Hopefully, being D3 folks, that also means you're generally JavaScript, web app development type folks, a lot of you at least. So you probably already read a little bit about the meetup through the meetup page, but we are Bleeding Edge Web. So hopefully, even if you came just for D3, you'll still find the Bleeding Edge part interesting and maybe come back to some other ones. I'm going to start out with my little news from the Bleeding Edge portion of the meetup, and I'll explain that in just a second. And if any of you have computers, you can actually follow along, and anyone on the live stream as well. This link right here, if you go to edgeatx.github.io, and there will be a link, and then these are all the presentations. They're just web pages, actually. And so the October one is the one we're looking at right now. So feel free to do that. And then Andrew Thornton will be getting up after me talking about D3, which I imagine is why a lot of you guys are here. So before I get into it, I'd like to thank, with a little round of applause, if you had any of the pizza, please give it up for PayPal. So PayPal, if you haven't followed along with them, you probably just think, oh, PayPal, they've kind of been around forever, not that interesting. They've actually been doing a lot of things lately that are very interesting, aside from the fancy new logo, which didn't notice exactly when that showed up, but that looks nice. But they're actually doing a lot of open source. If you do Node, for example, they're actually a big Node shop these days, and they're doing a lot of open source projects in Node. And so they've got a shop here in town, and Keith Burns right here is a development manager with PayPal. And they're actually hiring for Node.js web app development type people. So if anyone's interested or just wants to find out more about what PayPal's got going on, feel free to chat with Keith afterwards. So thanks, PayPal. Appreciate that. Bleeding Edge web site. So we actually added this website last month, but I kept the slide in here just in case anyone wanted to be aware of this again. So previously, we really didn't have anywhere to put all of our presentations and stuff, so we recently added that. So if you want to look at any of the stuff we've done in the past, feel free to do that. So news from the Bleeding Edge. Excuse me. It's my Marco Rubio moment. So it's basically pretty much every month. We're actually not doing the holidays because we're the fourth Wednesdays of the month, which coincide with the day before Thanksgiving and Christmas Eve this year. So we're going to skip those. But usually we try to hit it every month. And my section is usually about 20 minutes or so. And I basically pick and choose kind of interesting things that have happened in the world of browsers. What's with each of the major 5 browsers that most of us probably care about. They release nowadays, as you guys know, Chrome at least and Firefox are releasing fairly frequently, so it's kind of hard to keep up with what's going on. So I'll kind of highlight some of those things, W3C specs that are interesting, other frameworks, and anything that I think would generally be interesting to web app developers that you may not have caught when it was in the news or whatever. So to give you an example, we'll dive right in with a browser update. So I actually do this most every month. We skipped last month because of scheduling issues. So the last time we had our little browser pop quiz was in August, and these were the versions at the time. So can anyone tell me, as of today, 2 months later, what the versions are now of all these browsers? Anyone think they can get them all correct without cheating? What about Chrome?
38.
38? What about Firefox?
36.
Not 36.
Not 35.
Not 35, so you guys are way off.
34.
Okay, I'll make it easy. IE.
Oh,
Yes. So IE 11, of course, but actually every other browser, including Safari, which is notable, if you're not an OS X person, they just released Yosemite, the newest version of Mac stuff, and so with that came Safari 8. So just some of the highlights, and there, obviously with the browsers, there's a lot of more user-focused, end-user-focused features and things like that. We really try to stick to the things that I think would be interesting to you guys as developers. So in Chrome, there were actually quite a few things that have been around in the Canary versions for a while that have finally hit the stable version. And they're actually, a lot of them, pretty interesting. So responsive images is one of them. So we have these new tags along with this attribute called source set. And I won't go into it in detail, but basically these provide you a really elegant way to be able to provide responsive images, which is very important, especially nowadays with mobile. So the idea is basically, if you're on a Retina iMac and you want to do a full screen picture, well, you're talking about 3,000 pixels wide, really, to take up the full screen, right? Whereas if you're on mobile, you might be at 600 pixels wide. So how do you deal with that with the same picture? And this is the way that you do that. And so that's really useful and really cool. Unfortunately, it's not totally cross-browser yet, but the fact that it's at least in Chrome means that it's moving forward. ECMAScript 6, which will be the next upcoming version of JavaScript, you'll see that throughout the browser updates. So some key objects in that standard that have hit the stable version of Chrome. So that's cool if you're interested in kind of the upcoming JavaScript stuff. Bunch of math functions that probably aren't relevant to us too much. The screen orientation API is really for mobile, but it is kind of a cool thing if you are dealing with mobile web development. So it gives you hooks to be able to not only detect, but also to lock screen orientation on a web page. So that's kind of interesting. And then as usual, Chrome, the Google folks are big into security bounties, so they paid out $75K in security bounties in that release. So Firefox 32 also had a lot of stuff. So I won't go into all of it, basically some more ES6 stuff. Firefox is actually typically on the forefront of next version of JavaScript type features and so forth, which you would kind of expect being from Mozilla. Some new CSS properties. I'll call out one in particular, position sticky. That's a useful one because basically that's the idea where typically it's with menus and things that once you start to scroll the web page, when it gets to the top, a certain element, you want it to stick to the top and allow the body to continue scrolling, but stick that one element. So currently, it's really not easy to do that. Typically, people use jQuery plugins and things. So this is a browser native way of doing that through CSS. The Flexbox properties are also going to be more important as Flexbox layouts become more supported through browsers, but those properties are starting to hit the stable versions of Firefox. And experimental support, at least for the image source set stuff, which I just talked about for responsive images. And box decoration break is actually kind of an interesting one that I had not seen before. And it's basically to solve this problem. So if you've ever done web development and you have an inline block, like a span, for example, like an inline element that you style with border or background, when that thing wraps, it basically looks like this. It looks terrible. So the whole idea behind this new property, box decoration break, is you can have it inherit the full style on each instance across breaks, so you can make it look a lot nicer like that. So it's a minor thing, but it's actually kind of interesting, and I had not run across it before. And then in version 33, that was actually primarily a developer tools release as far as what we care about. So there's a ton of stuff that I won't go into, but I linked this page that kind of covers it. They basically introduced a lot of stuff in their developer panel that is really useful for debugging, and they've got like a editor for Bezier curves, sort of 3D transformation information, a whole bunch of stuff actually. So that actually might be worth checking out. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but with Firefox, like I personally have been using Chrome primarily for a long time, but there's actually a lot of cool stuff happening in Firefox from the developer tool perspective, so it might be something worth checking out. Opera is typically, kind of the unloved browser. Most people don't worry about it too much. And the good thing is you don't really have to worry about it nowadays, because if you're not familiar, Opera adopted the Blink rendering engine of Chrome. So they basically track Chromium now. And the nice thing about that is all of the nice things that go into Chromium, a lot of them from Google, also go into Opera. And then Opera as well kind of puts their own effort into more on the UI side. But so the good thing is Opera is a lot more easy to deal with now than it used to be. So they added support for CSS shapes, which I didn't mention earlier, but that was in Chrome as well. And CSS shapes is actually really cool. Actually, I'll skip that for now. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Some new CSS properties, and then one of the things we talked about in a previous meetup is Chrome and Opera removed the show modal dialog JavaScript function, which is not used by that many people, but if you do use it, you probably missed it. So now they've introduced the dialog tag, which replaces that. And that's basically an in-page JavaScript-based dialog, modal dialog, as opposed to like a JavaScript alert pop-up. And then version 25 is basically the same as Chrome 38. The one notable thing is that they did add the notifications API, which has been in Chrome for a while. It took them a while to add it for various reasons. The notifications API is basically a way to notify a web page from a third-party service in the same way that you would notify like a mobile phone or something like that. So that's still not widely supported, but that'll actually be a pretty useful one for making desktops and mobile devices work seamlessly together going forward on the web. And then Safari, again, probably from a developer's perspective, you don't probably deal with it too much, but it was actually a pretty big release. WebGL, IndexedDB are pretty major features. JavaScript promises is part of the whole ES6 thing that I talked about earlier. And CSS shapes, we see that again. So that's important, and I'll get to that in just a second. And the IE highlights, that's pretty much it. Or IE. Okay, so one of the things I also like to talk about sometimes is what's going on with W3C spec type stuff. And there's a ton of specs out there, and I know you guys probably don't care about all that stuff too much. The thing about specs, they're necessary because they move things forward, but from a practical standpoint, they don't really affect our day-to-day lives that much as developers, because they don't really matter until what the specs are talking about actually start hitting browsers. Well, with CSS shapes, it is kind of interesting because this is starting to hit browsers, and it is actually a really cool feature. How many people are familiar with this, with CSS shapes, by show of hands? So just a small handful. So as the description says, it basically allows you to wrap content, like text generally, around custom shapes, custom paths. And the reason that's cool is, as you can see, this says this is a live example. So I can select this text, and who thinks they could implement this just using like spans? It'd be crazy, right? And when you start doing things like resizing, doing all that kind of stuff, you'd pretty much be out of luck. So the really cool thing about this, let me see if I can do this with one hand. Get my dev tools up. So the cool thing about this is you kind of can't see it at the moment. Let me see if I can make it in. So I don't know what's up with the offset here. I think that's just a browser quirk thing with the dev tools being open or something. But what I have my mouse over here is the actual element, the image element, which I've applied my shape CSS to. And so you can see that the outline of that element, as far as the browser is concerned, is the outline of that image, which is kind of cool. And the way it works with images, at least, is it basically reads based on opacity settings. So you want to use a GIF or PNG or something that you can have a transparent background. And so it actually figures out on its own what's transparent and figures out the border based on when it hits opaque pixels, which is kind of cool. And there's a setting where you can tell it the percentage of opacity to use for that border. So if you have like a gradient shadow or something like that, you can actually specify how far into that gradient the text will actually go. So does anyone think that's kind of cool? And the really cool thing about it is, check this out. This is the code for that example, right? It's trimmed a little bit, but I basically have an image that is a standard image tag with a class of shape. That's the only thing on it. And I've defined a style called shape. And the paragraphs are just standard paragraphs. That could be any content. And that's it. And so the whole key to this, and obviously the browser has to support it, which Chrome does, but the key to it is the target element that you're going to create the shape out of has to be floated left or right. And then you have this shape outside CSS property. And in this case, we're using an image, so it's literally just the URL to that image. And that's it. And the browser just takes care of it. So that's really pretty awesome.
How does the shape, I don't know how to ask this question. Like, is it based on the alpha channel or something of the image? Aren't all images rectangular?
Yeah, so the question is it based on alpha channel to find the border of the image? And so, and yes, from a box model perspective in the DOM, all images are rectangular. It doesn't use alpha channel because not all images that support transparency have alpha channel, like for example GIF, but it basically reads the transparency value of the pixels. I don't know if that's, I don't know technically like how it's implemented, but because I tried it with a GIF image to a transparent GIF. Actually, this one might be, I think, because I think PNG was too big.
What's a GIF?
Okay, so there you go. So yeah, I don't know technically, like I said, I don't think it's alpha channel per se, but it based on the properties that it gives you to be able to customize the opacity level to set for the border, it is based somehow on reading the opacity of those pixels. As far as the algorithm for how they actually figure that out, I'm sure that's pretty interesting code in the browser.
Is there anything for clicks on shapes?
So the question is there anything for clicks on shapes, by which I assume you mean
Like odd shapes?
handling a click on the shape and not on the box part of it that you're excluding. That I'm not familiar with whether that's supported or not. As far as I know, from a standards perspective, it's strictly the CSS layout perspective of it. So I didn't see anything related to like JavaScript event handling or anything like that. But I'm not actually sure the answer to that.
Do you know whether or not you can get the text to continue flowing to the right side after it's pushed to the left?
So repeat the question.
Well, so not whether or not you, sort of like when you give them full justification, but not with full, because it looks, right now what it's doing is it's moving everything to the left.
Yeah, and so I don't know if you guys noticed, but you've been rickrolled. This is the lyrics to Never Gonna Give You Up.
Yeah, I noticed.
Anyone notice that? Okay. Bonus points. So this is actually, those are line breaks after each line because it is just song lyrics. Text justification and all that stuff is totally as normal. It's basically, think of it from that perspective as the same thing as any case of having a floated element with text next to it. So however you want to lay out that text is going to work the same way. The only thing that's affected is the left border of that text will flow, differently than as opposed to straight up and down. But the right border will be controlled by the content itself and how you style it. So on a side note, who here is using Modernizer? Few people. So Modernizer is a really awesome library if you're doing web development and you care at all about cross-browser support for stuff you're doing in JavaScript and CSS. It basically gives you a really nice, easy way of doing feature detection and feature fallback support. And so I'll show you what I mean. So again, we're looking at Chrome, and you can see that this is fully supported as of Chrome 37, I believe, whatever my slide said. And now if I pull up Firefox, So this is the exact same page, and you can see, first off, this difference. So this, on my slide, it says this is a live example. In Firefox, it says to view the live example, use a browser that supports it. And then the other thing is if I try to select this, you'll see it's actually an image. So it's a fallback image that I created so that the page still works even when that feature doesn't work, right? Which is nice. You guys can say it, you can admit it. So the way I did that was I used Modernizer. And again, surprisingly easy to do. So all I did, if you can actually look at the source on the slide to see this. So I included Modernizer. I have my first container div, which contains whatever content I want. That's the actual live example content. And then I created a container div, which is my fallback content. So that's the image, text, whatever else you want, really. And then the key is what Modernizer does is it basically adds a bunch of feature-specific class names to the HTML tag of the page, and then you can use standard CSS selector syntax based on those class names to create your own custom styles. So the common use case, like what I'm doing here, is basically hiding and showing these content blocks based on the availability of this .shapes class name. And so, again, I'll just show you guys exactly kind of what it looks like. Okay, so if you can see that. Sorry, I'm doing the whole, I need like a mic stand, Rocket Aerosmith style, make it easier. Okay, so you can see here that the HTML tag has all these classes, and this, you can actually create a custom build of Modernizer just for the features you care about, but for demo purposes, I just kind of included everything. So, if I want to know whether the browser I'm actually running in supports WebGL, Canvas, Flexbox, IndexedDB, all this stuff, I can test for it, and I can provide fallback functionality on any or all of that I want to. And the other thing, so that's kind of the declarative API. And then the other thing you can do is you can say like modernizer.shapes, which is true. So there's a declarative way of doing it through CSS, and you can also use the imperative JavaScript library as well if you want to write JavaScript code to do something even fancier. Okay? So just one simple example, but Modernizer is awesome, and you should check it out if you have the need to do that kind of stuff. So back to CSS shapes. The key idea I mentioned earlier is shapes have to be floated, which is kind of a bummer a little bit, but it is what it is. There are also some built-in shapes aside from using custom images. You can use the circles and polygons and basically just plot the points that you want for polygons to create custom shapes that way. Then it has other layout properties you can use as well. So why is this interesting? I hinted at this earlier. It's interesting because, number one, the use case is interesting. I think you guys were all kind of at least impressed by my Rickroll example. It's kind of cool. And so the idea is you can basically create print quality layouts in a way that we really can't do in a practical way today, just with divs and spans. It's also a candidate recommendation, which is important. So with W3C, if you don't follow it closely, typically there's a lot of steps that these specs go through, from initial public comment to various levels of review and public feedback and whatever. But once it's gotten to candidate recommendation, that means it's pretty much stable and it's pretty much ready to start being implemented. And to that point, it has been implemented just in the last few months by Chrome, Opera, and Safari. So my asterisk there at the very bottom says that Firefox, surprisingly, has not implemented it. And again, like I mentioned earlier, Firefox is typically kind of on the forefront of these kinds of things. So I'm not sure why they haven't done this particular feature, but hopefully they'll do it soon. But for Firefox and for IE, of course, which will probably never do it, there is a polyfill library available, which just means that it's a drop-in library that basically reproduces that functionality via JavaScript for you. And then there are actually some editors built into the browser, or not built in, but there's a plugin for Chrome, and then there's a plugin for the brackets editor. And this is basically, the screenshot shows you kind of what it looks like. So it's a little WYSIWYG thing that actually lets you grab the image, move it around, change the properties. visually. So if you're more interested in this, check out the slide deck. This has these resources. And finally, why level 1? There actually is a level 2 spec. It's currently in editor's draft, meaning it is going to be a while before it starts landing in browsers. But it'll just extend level 1. And so the cool thing about it is that it'll support standard positioning. So instead of just having to do floats, you can actually do, like with this image, it's using an absolute position shape right in the middle of the text, and then the text is just flowing right around it. So that'll be really cool. So that was kind of long. Here's my intermission, hang on. You guys can grab a smoke or whatever. I love this image. Okay, so I have a little break here, my intermission. Trivia question. Some of you guys might have already seen this, but I think probably some of you guys haven't. So currently Windows is at version 8. Did you know that it's actually jumping a version going straight to 10? How many of you guys knew that? Okay, cool, a lot of you knew that. Why do we have no Windows 9? Who knows?
Because 789.
Because 7. Okay, I actually need to find a prize just for that answer. That was perfect. So the answer that my 5-year-old daughter would totally appreciate is because 789. Great answer, but not correct. Yeah.
I heard it was a lot of back support for just checking for versions, Windows 9 being Windows 95, Windows 98 catch-alls.
Yeah, I think we have a winner. So interestingly, it was asked. So they had this big, whatever this picture was from, like this big unveiling event where they were talking about it. And so someone asked a Microsoft spokesman why that is. And so the quote that I'll actually read, because it's so useless, is Windows 10 carries Windows forward into a new way of doing things. It is not an incremental change, but a new Windows that will empower the next billion users. So that's really useful, right? So the real likely answer, Anil Dash on the internet, probably some other people talked about it, but just think like when Windows 95 came out, prior to that, there was all this, Windows 3, Windows NT, Windows whatever, and then it kind of jumped to Windows 9. So the prevailing theory is that there's probably a lot of specific checking, not only in Windows itself, but in probably like enterprise apps and things that have been using Windows forever, that might actually be doing version checks based on Windows 9. So that's kind of the prevailing theory among technology folks. So that's my little giveaway. I have this O'Reilly functional JavaScript book. There you go. Okay, intermission's over. Back to the last little section here. So this is kind of a catch-all, just interesting things that are happening in frameworks and tools. There's this thing, if you're into Node, there's this interesting project called Node OS. So they claim that it's the, quote, first operating system powered by NPM. So I won't go into the details, and it's actually still an early project, but it's on GitHub. So if you use Node a lot, if you use NPM a lot, it might be something to check out. It's kind of interesting. But they're basically trying to create, essentially a Linux-based runtime that is first-class Node and NPM. So if that sounds interesting to you, check it out. How many people do Perl? One person
Do I get a book?
does Perl. No, you get therapy is what you get. So unfortunately, I hate to say it, but although I did find this interesting. So how many people have heard of this Mojolicious framework? Anyone? Have you heard of it? Bill?
No.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting. It's basically the Rails for Perl. So just what the world needed, right? I don't know why you would build that, but I thought it was interesting, which is why I brought it up. But it actually has like all the features you would expect of Rails, Django, any kind of modern web app framework, and then of course the Perl style templates. And so just to give you a brief glimpse of what this is actually an example from their examples, and it's like Perl in a nutshell, because this is actually a fairly complex thing functionally done in 2 lines of code, because it's parsing a web page, pulling the content of a web page, parsing it, and spitting it back out in a structured format.
What?
In 2 lines of code, right? Classic Perl, I love it. So if this looks crazy to you, the way it does to me, you can just ignore this whole slide, but for Bill, there you go. You can go play with that. UI Lang, I've mentioned, is kind of interesting. It's actually targeted more toward web designers than hardcore developers, but it's kind of cool. If you check out their site, they've got some neat interactive examples. But their whole thing is they basically are talking to designers, trying to give designers an easy way to mock up interactions in the browser. And so the interesting thing about this example is the code that goes with it. So that's what it looks like. That's literally the code you would write if you include UI lang.js, some standard content, and then you use their syntax in a code block that reads like English, right? Clicking on hide adds class hidden on notification. And if you click that button, it actually fades out nicely, and it's a nice little effect. So that's kind of interesting. So if you're a less technical person, or if you work with a designer or whatever, that might be an interesting library to check out. And then a little shout out to PayPal, our sponsor, because I ran across this, and this has actually been a pain point for me in the past. Yahoo used to put out a really nice HTML5 video player, and they killed it like about a year ago, which was a bummer because I was using it in a project. And there are various solutions out there, but there's really nothing that's super good right now. And all the ones that are out there that I've seen have drawbacks. This one, I haven't used it yet in a project, but it actually looks really good functionally. So it's native HTML5. It has accessibility built in, and it's no external dependencies, not even jQuery, and it works really well. So if you have a need for that, check it out. And that's an open source as well, so you can go to GitHub and actually look at the source and hack on it, which is cool. So thanks again, PayPal. A few random resources. A lot of you have probably seen this website, Can I Use? You may not have looked at it in a while. It had been a while since I looked at it. They've updated it quite a bit, and it's super useful now, so you might check it out, again, if you're interested in browser support at a feature level. So for CSS, JavaScript, and all the stuff I was talking about earlier, this basically is you type into the box at the top, and it filters real time down to those particular things, and it shows you exactly what browsers support what. So that's a really cool resource if you need that. I also ran into this service, which just came out within the last couple of months. So it's kind of in the same ballpark of these other things I'm talking about. If you deal a lot with having to support multiple browsers, and you're doing anything kind of on the leading edge of JavaScript and CSS, then at some point you're probably going to deal with polyfills, especially if you have to support IE. So this is kind of an interesting service because they basically use user agent string detection per request and construct a individualized set of polyfill code that will be delivered to that browser for that request. And of course, it's all cached and everything like that at the server level. But that individual browser, as far as it knows, it's getting a completely customized script returned to it that polyfills the features that are not available in that browser, which is really cool. So it's basically, as I said here, kind of a carefree way to leverage the latest standards type stuff that we're talking about without necessarily having to go in and write your own code to deal with that. And so this is just a little example of like what you would actually see in the console. So it tells you what it detected and what features it thinks you need and what was delivered to your browser. So a very cool one. This is kind of random, but as developers, generally we're always looking for icons and stuff. This particular site I ran across, and it's really good, and you can customize the icons, and it's royalty free. So I'm just throwing it in there. If you hadn't seen it, you should check it out. So the final little section for something completely different, some cool Firefox features you may have missed. So I actually did mention this one earlier when I flew through those browser slides. Event listeners pop up. This is a really cool thing. So if you're looking in the developer tools box, now in Firefox, any element that has event listeners, event handlers tied to it, actually show this little EV icon. And if you click on it, you get a list of all the handlers that are tied to that. And you can actually expand this little window and look at that code. That's actually really useful for a number of reasons. So if you've ever done any kind of like memory leak debugging in the DOM, or if you've ever wondered kind of, excuse me, if you have a lot of event handling in your page and you've ever wondered like actually what's going on, this is a really cool way of visualizing that and debugging it. Another thing they have is this responsive design mode. So I could actually bring this up. So the responsive design mode, it's not that. I may have turned it off. Where did the button go? That's weird. All right. Oh, it's that one, sorry. Just misreading my buttons. So this is kind of a cool little view that is, really about mobile device layout debugging type stuff. So you can have preset sizes that you can change it to. And then the really cool thing is once you are kind of dealing with a particular size, you can click this button to get a screen print as it looks, theoretically on that device. So you can actually drop this right into a prototype or do whatever you want. But anyway, that's kind of a cool little feature. And the final thing, my favorite, who has seen the 3D DOM view in Firefox? Okay, for those of you who haven't seen it, prepare to have your mind blown. Excuse me. So this screenshot is actually of my Twitter page. I picked it because it has a lot of DOM stuff going on. Oh, I'm not going to sign in. I'll just show you on this page. Let me pick this page. Okay, so we have this new little thing. Oh, and I was going to show you. So if you click on the little settings thing, some of these features are enabled and disabled through the developer tools. So 3D view right here is one of those. And I think it's off by default. But if you enable it, then you get this little 3D view button. And you get this cool thing. Sorry. Let me do that again just for effect. Okay, ready? Nice little animation. It's not bad, right? So I'm going to use 2 hands for this. Hang on a second. So feels like you're flying through the Death Star, right? See if I can get out of that. And it's actually, even though it's kind of eye candy, it's actually practical. If you've ever done layout debugging in the browser, you will know that when you're dealing with stuff like this, where you have a lot of stacked DOM elements, you end up with a lot of things that are sort of hidden when you're looking at a 2D view. And so like in the past, what I've ended up doing a lot is you go into Inspector and you type Command F and you start searching for things to try to figure out, to identify where things are. This is actually really cool because you can visually kind of dig right down to this level, click on it, and it highlights right in the Inspector at that level, right? That's pretty awesome. So the point to this little section is what I said earlier. A lot of us, probably most of us who've been doing web development long enough, probably used Firefox as their primary toolset plus Firebug for a long time. I know I did. But then when Chrome came out, it kind of leapfrogged, and I've been using Chrome a lot since then. Firefox has been doing a lot of interesting stuff in their dev tools. So if you haven't looked at Firefox lately, you might definitely check it out. Is that a question?
Yeah, well, it's a comment. I was going to say that you didn't mention the web CLI in Firefox, which I think that would be useful to look at there.
Yeah, so it was unclear to me the question was about the web, I think they call it Web IDE, actually, right? Is that what you're referring to? Or is it something different?
No, I thought it was CLI. It's just like
the command line interface?
You're working with Firefox, and so you can control aspects of its inspector and toggle different features in Firefox on and off from a command line. Okay,
so that's something I haven't actually played with. So the comment was there's a tool called Web CLI, which gives you like a command line interface to customize the dev tools and things like that. So yeah, I'm just not familiar with that particular one. Like I said, I haven't been using Firefox myself. These are just things that I've been running across lately that have kind of reignited my interest in using it. So Like I said, that's my advice to you. If you haven't checked it out lately, you should definitely at least check it out. Okay, so that ended up going a little longer than my normal section, and we got started a little bit late. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Andy, and we'll talk about D3.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for showing up. It's good to see such a big crowd for D3. Not quite used to this, and our meetups were limited to about 15 people, so it's a little different than I'm used to. So sorry, guys, for your view at the moment. But this is D3.js, data visualization for the modern web. So sorry, Internet Explorer 8 and below. When I do these, I like to ask the crowd, what's your basic experience with D3, if any? When I arrived in Austin about 2 years ago, I was actually quite surprised that there wasn't a whole lot of info out there in Austin, and that I would be the guy to kind of, I guess, lead the charge for D3 in Austin. So, so anybody, by show of hands, if you'd help me out, entertain me on my survey here. Anybody out there that thinks they should be up here speaking instead of me? No offense to me. Okay, cool. I can make a lot of stuff up now. Anybody out there think they know enough just to be dangerous? All right, couple. Good, good. That's the fun part. Anybody out there that can go copy and paste the examples and then kind of back away slowly and hope nothing goes wrong? All right, it's about normal. How about those of you who have just heard of it? No shame. Cool. Anybody here just for the food? Lies. And then anybody else just get lost trying to find your hotel room? Okay, cool. So that's about what I expected. Most people have kind of played around with it, copying and pasting some of the examples and just kind of shoehorn it into their project and see where it takes them. So, a little bit about me, my background. Bachelor of Computer Science from Stack Overflow. I am actually not a programmer in that sense. My background was in industrial engineering. Never took a programming class in my undergrad. I was dropped off in Reynosa, Mexico, and told, hey, go program these robots. So I did that for about 3 years, programmed robots, programmed PLCs, with the goal of making air conditioning compressors for you all up here in hot weather every 8 seconds. So after I got a little bit tired of driving to work in gun battles, I thought maybe a little career change would be good. So my minor as an undergrad was in statistics. So I always had that kind of pulling me away from what I was doing there in Mexico. And I always really enjoyed data visualization. So I would try to find excuses to work on data visualization projects at that job. And I found Tableau, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I can interact with the data. But I guess I was greedy and it didn't do enough. So I was like, I kind of want to do more. So I decided all the statisticians are using R, so I'll use R. And in spite of using R, I still decided to keep with programming. And I began searching out there for what else is there. I really wanted interaction. I wanted cool transitions, all the cool things that everyone likes, the reason everyone's here. So I don't know what Google search I put in, but I found D3 somehow. So I said, well, cool, I really want to learn this. I guess I should probably learn to program first. So my amount of experience I have with D3 actually coincides with the amount of experience I have with JavaScript and actually web development in general. So I spent a lot of time just in my spare time learning how to program, learning D3, pouring through the examples, being a wallflower in the Google group, absorbing all the information I could, which slowly morphed into me answering questions in the Google group, which then snowballed into me being approached to co-author a book on advanced D3 topics, which kind of blew me away. But I was like, okay, cool. And that really kind of bolstered my confidence, working with guys I saw in the Google groups, answering really complex questions, and being able to work alongside them. So the book is called Developing a D3.js Edge. don't go buy it right now because there's a 50% coupon. So don't all rush at once. So with the royalties from that book, I actually retired and I'm now a philanthropist. So actually, I can maybe buy like 2 beer every 3 months. So once I got to Austin, I realized there wasn't much of a D3 scene, so I decided to start the Austin D3.js Meetup. We meet sporadically based on the amount of time that I have available. Our next meetup is coming up November 7th. It's about Angular and D3 integration. So if you like listening to me speak, you can do it again November 7th. And then from that, I was plucked away from my job, and I'm currently the senior front-end developer for a small startup here called Exego Energy Solutions. We do software for the energy sector, so I spend most of my days pretending I actually know what I'm doing. So what I do is Angular. Actually, my Angular chops, I guess, are probably now above my D3 to squeeze it so heavily, but my main focus is Angular and D3 integration for basically enterprise level applications that have data visualization. So that's my my background. Little D3 history was created by a guy named Mike Bostock. Well, he was originally at Square, now works for the New York Times. It came about late 2010, 2011, so apparently I must have stumbled upon it right after its inception or release. It was born out of a library you might have heard of called ProtoViz. Unlike ProtoViz, D3 doesn't come up on such a level of abstraction like ProtoViz does. ProtoViz tried to get you away from the DOM, get you away from some of the standards. I think that approach proved futile as web standards changed, then their API and stuff had to change. So D3 took it down a level and then kind of really embraced the web standards. And there's a link here to I'll send you guys the presentation, but there's a link there to a paper for IEEE, which is kind of like the kickoff of D3. So you can get some history there if you're interested. So I guess that got cut off. Some of the benefits is the fact that D3 doesn't really rebuke the web standards, it actually embraces them. Benefit of this being that as the web standards change, you can pretty much use those features immediately. Since you're not a layer of abstraction above these standards, they're available to you instantaneously as they come out. Along with this, technologies that you love and or hate are also available to you to style your visualizations, such HTML, SVG, CSS, JavaScript. Another benefit, obviously, is it's a very active community. The Google group is very helpful. If you post a question, you're likely to get an answer that day, maybe within an hour, maybe within a minute, sometimes from me, or from many others that are just kind of cruising around. And sorry, I got cut off at the bottom. One of the other benefits is that it's easy to debug because it's web standard, so you have the JavaScript or the consoles available to you to debug as necessary. And of course, the best benefit is that it's just really cool. So this is an example that Mike Bostock put together of a pretty popular visualization you might have seen by Hans Rosling. It's The Wealth of Nations. So this is all obviously in the DOM, all the animations. So this type of thing is, easy and possible in D3. So, we've got these types of cool interactions. So, quick note: all the examples I'll show you are products that Mike Bostock has put out, as opposed to doing my own, which one would have taken a very long time. Also, his are a lot more ubiquitous. You can find them. You can continue if you see something here interesting. You can kind of run with it. When you get back, if you want to do some work on your own. They're presented using what's called the Blocks Code Viewer. It's a product that he put together that's really kind of dovetails nicely with D3. And I would encourage you to use it. Check it out. It's just a GIST-backed code viewer. If you create a GIST, you can copy the code at the end of your GIST and replace it with blocks.org, or the GIST portion with blocks.org. Send that link, and then those of us in the Google group can use that to go help you kind of debug. And it presents the code very nicely for all of us if you're searching for help. It's better than just pasting a bunch of code in an email. So real quick, what D3 isn't. D3 is not a charting library. I know you're thinking, you just showed me a chart, said it was built with D3, how is it not a charting library? It's not a charting library, and there's no function that says, make me a bar chart. That doesn't exist in D3. So what D3 is essentially just a toolkit that turns your data into DOM, nothing more. There's some tools in there, a couple utilities that make this process easier, that transform your data, but in general, it basically takes your data and turns it into DOM. That's it. There's a few essential elements that you really need to kind of jumpstart. There's about 3 that I'll show you today, and then kind of buzz through some others. But the first and foremost is called the data join. It is the most important concept in D3, also the most misunderstood. I'll see questions all the time in the Google group, people, just horribly abusing what the data join should look like. So if it feels like you're doing something wrong, if you have 5 nested for loops trying to put elements on the DOM, it's definitely wrong. Everyone goes through that as they learn D3. It's a very elegant process, the data join, but it's kind of hard to grasp or wrap your head around. So a few resources that I would highly recommend as first reading before you do anything else, before you try to put something on the DOM, is these 3 here, called Thinking with Joins. This one kind of goes through a very high overview of how the joining process works, which I'll talk about a little bit. There's another little tutorial called 3 Little Circles. Very basic, how to get circles on DOM based on data. And then another one, real in-depth but very thorough, highly recommend, called How Selections Work. So these would be my 3 required readings if you're really interested in D3. So. And by the way, interrupt me with questions at any time. So.
And those resources are just off the D3 main site? Yeah,
I'll tell you, I'll show you, so it's his website. So this is the Thinking with Joins. This one's very succinct, but if you go to bostock.ox.org/Mike, that's where all his tutorials are. And I'll show you a link here a little bit later. So those 3 links certainly require reading, in my opinion. So let's take a real quick look at the join syntax. Hopefully you guys are okay with some technical, overview here. So these few lines of code right here are what you really need to master to be good at D3. Essentially what it says here is, we've got 2 data points, right, with an X and a Y, array of data. And what we're saying is basically, we have an SVG element that's defined above, so you can take that for granted. But so basically what it says is select all circles that are on the SVG, take my data array and bind that to those circles. That's what happens here. This is the bind. For all the circles that don't already exist, circle.enter. That translates to all the circles that don't already exist, put 1 there. That's it. For all the circles that do exist, update their information. So here we're saying set the radius, set the X and the Y for the ones that do exist. And for any that no longer have corresponding data, get rid of them. That's it. So those few simple lines are most commonly misunderstood, but they're definitely the crux of what D3 does. So we'll take a look here. Let's dissect this a little bit. The bind, this is the magic part. So what it does is, as I mentioned, it takes this array of data, and what it says is select all circles on the SVG, and it says even the ones that don't exist. So how's that possible? If they don't exist, how can I select them? What D3 does is actually create a virtual selection. These elements aren't there, so it virtually creates them, and all it really does is create, instead of the DOM element, it creates an object. So what that allows us to do then is basically enter new elements and exit old elements. So here we basically just bind to all the circles that do or could possibly exist. So there's 2 combinations here. This one just says join the data by index. So if there's 5 circles on the page already, but I got new data that's only a length 2, then the first 2 circles that are there on the DOM are going to get updated with these 2 information. The remainders go away. An alternative, slightly more complex, is we can actually join the data by a key. So here we have an array of 2 objects, value and a name, value and a name. So what happens is, so say I have 5 circles on the DOM. I get new data of only length 2. That means 3 circles have to go away. 2 of them stay. If there's already a circle for me, Andy, it can stay. If there's not a circle anymore in my new data for Catherine, it has to go. So this becomes important when you want to transition elements out, and you want consistency in those transitions. So this is used for advanced situations, but I just wanted you to be aware of it. So after we've bound the data to the elements, this is where the enter statement is where you turn virtual into reality. So all it does is it says, okay, I've got, say I've got 2 elements already on the DOM, right? 2 circles. But I get new data of length 10. I have to create 8 circles. It's pretty simple, right? Well, without this enter append, those circles will never get on the DOM. So this has to happen whenever you get new data. It'll simply take those empty virtual selections, those objects with the data attributes, and create text elements. Benefit of this is that you only need to create new elements. So we all know that appending elements to the DOM is quite expensive and definitely impacts performance. So if you've got 5,000 circles on a page, you don't want to have to remove them and select them, right? It's going to really affect your performance. If you get a new circle pop in every second, you only append 1 circle. So that's really beneficial for performance. And finally, or secondly actually, the update. The update says, okay, for all the circles that were there already, for the data, their new data, just simply update them with any new information that we have. One caveat I will let you know of is with the enter and the update, they're actually automatically merged by D3 so that you don't have to redo these 3 bottom lines of code right here. So that's merged for you. So anytime you need to set like common attributes, radius, for example, or say you want to set like a stroke or a stroke dash, you can do it all in the update selection. So keep that in mind. You don't need to duplicate code. And then the exit, very straightforward. For all the elements that I don't need anymore, for all the elements that no longer have data that correspond to them, get them out of there, remove them. So with those, basically 4 pieces, you can essentially get 80% of the way there with D3.
Does it actually remove them from there, or it doesn't save them for like maybe later on you might need them?
No.
So recreating them? Okay.
No, yeah. If they're a part of the remove, then they're gone. That actually exits them from the DOM. So why do we need this division of labor? Why do we need an enter and an exit? Well, one important reason is that so we can act on them differently. We can treat them differently. A good example is for the exit elements. If you've got a circle that needs to leave the screen, well, maybe you want to show the user that it's leaving, you can scale the radius down to 0 and then pop it off the screen. So that's what this is doing. So it's allowing me to say, okay, for all the circles I don't need anymore, I'm going to apply a transition. I'm going to bring the radius down to 0 from whatever it was before, obviously larger than 0, and then I'll remove it. So it gives the user a nice indication that the removal is actually happening. So, and I can show you guys if you're interested, kind of what this actually looks like in slow-mo. I find it helps people. So try to do this one-handed. So just a quick explanation. This is the basic situation where data is entering and exiting. It's the alphabet, random letters come in. All the new ones that need to be added are in green. Anything that's exiting, we just don't see. It just goes away, okay? So I'm going to take this and I'm going to slow it down so you guys can actually see what this looks like. Okay, so this is simply a loop. that he's just randomizing the alphabet and saying, and running this select thing we just talked about. You can see it here. Select all text, SVG text elements. Bind our new data. This is the update. It's in a little bit different order than I had it in, but it doesn't make a difference. So he adds a class for the updating ones. It says they're updating. The entering ones, we set their X based on, oh yeah, sorry. I need to zoom in.
Is your data just an array of letters?
Yeah, just a simple array of A, B, C, D, E, randomized. So here, on all the letters that we need to add that are entering entering the DOM, we'll append the text and give them the class enter, which makes them green. We'll set their X for the update. For all the letters that can stay, we'll update their text. So D is just, I'll show you this here a little bit. And then for all the ones that are exiting, they get to go away. So we'll take a quick look at this. It's kind of hard on this squash screen. I'll put this down real quick. So there's the new data, right? So it's a length of 4. Let's see if I can get this. Bear with me here. Scroll this back into view. Okay. So this is new data that came in. So it says data. So the length of our new data is 9. Obviously, we have more than 9 text elements on the screen, right? So that means something has to go away. We only want 9 on here now, so the rest need to go away. So the enter selection, I'll show you what it actually looks like in code, is right here. So what we did is we said select all text elements. Obviously there were 22 text elements on there before. You can see them right here. So it selects all text elements and says, how many do I need to enter? Well, it should be pretty obvious here that none, right? The enter selection is all null, so that means nothing is going to get added. So that is our enter selection. The update selection, which is right here. So we knew our new data was length 9, right? So there's the new 9 data points that come in. So it updates the elements, partial amount of the elements that are already there with our new data. So this is the this is the update selection. So you can see our data was DFGK. So it's taken the first 9 elements that are already there on the screen and updated their data. So just to show you what the data binding process is, this is what it actually does. It sets a property on this DOM element, data __. Now this can be just a string, it can be a JavaScript object, it can be any acceptable data form. So that is the actual data binding process. That's what happens when you perform those joins that I just showed you. So since our incoming data array is shorter than the amount of elements that are already on the screen, we know we have to get rid of some. So if we look at our exit selection, we can see that we're going to keep, this is the exit selection, the first 9 elements get to stay. So the exit selection, the first 9 are all null, so those guys get to stay. And then it's actually going to act upon the rest of these elements here in the array and actually move them off the screen. So we can kind of see it here. Nothing gets entered since our new data array is shorter. You should see the first letters change once we execute the update. So you see how those change, right? And then our exit statement, all the things on the end that no longer need to be there, go away. So in this process, this just loops, and that's how it.
One question I had there is that you had K entered and K left, but you reused the K?
Yeah, exactly. So the question was, why didn't it reuse the K if it was already there? And that's because we didn't use the key function. So remember in the data bind where I had the by name or just by index? So by index, it just simply takes the length of the array compared to the length of the selection. It has no knowledge of what that the data value is of the element that you're updating and or removing or entering. So if you use the key, and I can show you what that example would look like. If you use the key, it'll actually take out that letter that needs to go away. So that's why the key function is important.
Is the loop just changing the data object and the stuff automatically updates once the data? Okay.
Yeah, so that, I'll show you here. I did question. Oh yeah, sorry. The question was, is it just looping with new data and then all the selections are updating automatically? Yes, it is. It's a function that accepts. So basically, that select pattern I showed you was wrapped in a function that can accept new data. That data is passed into the new selection. The new join is performed, and all the DOM elements are updated accordingly. To show you what the key function does for you. So here, see how we provide a key function? This is why the key function is important. So you see the black ones are the ones that get to stay. So that is for continuity in your data when you need to actually update and exit elements for, to basically let them know which elements stay, because before we just kept popping them on or popping them off the array. Here is where that key function comes into play. Same selection. The only difference that changed in that is that we provided a key function and said basically join it by the letter instead of joining it by the index. So basically what he did there was, this is our select function. All he did was wrap it in what is typically seen in examples as a draw. The draw takes in new data, passes it to the data selection, and re-renders at will. So this is important, obviously, because we like to get data from APIs, right? We don't really have, some of you may have static visualizations. If you have a static visualization, this is all you really ever need because your data never changes, right? You actually only need the enter. You don't even need the exit because no data is leaving. But if you want to get data from an API from a server, then you need this pattern. So you'll see this a lot. We wrap the select function and a draw function that takes new data, pass it in. We can loop. We can do whatever we need. And if you're really cool, you can get data from WebSockets. Call your draw function exactly the same way. As a new point comes in, the chart will re-render. This is used a lot for real-time data. A long time ago, I made a Twitter visualization like everybody does, where every time a tweet would send out, it would pop up on the map. And actually, it kind of implicitly made a map of the US after a certain amount of time, just a black screen with white dots. And I got that data from Twitter's streaming API, and it was basically exactly this function. They put a circle on the graph at a latitude and longitude. So another thing you're going to need, certainly, I'll just cover these briefly, is scales. Unless you know exactly on the screen where you want to put a point and absolute coordinates, you're going to need a scale. What scales will do in D3 is take your data domains and map them to physical ranges on your screen. So if you've got a visualization, 1,000 pixels wide, you want to scale your data domain. If you want the start of the data at 0 and the end of the data at 1,000, then you need to scale your domain, or scale your data appropriately. Scales come in a few flavors: linear, ordinal scales, time scales, which is really handy, and there's a few more: log scales, power scales, all kinds of scales. So this is a typical setup of a scale. Just cover real quick. We've got 4 data points, or data set of lengths 4, a height and a width. Each data point with an x and a y, and we can scale these linearly by getting the extent of our data along the x and passing in a range, so 0 to width. So all that means is when I pass in 0 to this scale function, I'll return 0 pixels. That means the value of 0 will show up at 0 pixels on the screen. 1 returns 326, 2, 653, and so on. So,
in this example, where you basically have the pattern of your scale, linear, then your domain, your range. I've seen other examples where before you actually have your data, you just have the scale linear and then your range without add the domain later when you actually have your data. Is it still a function at that point without the domain to it?
yeah, so the question is, basically, why would you can you put the domain, after the fact? To basically define xscale as scale linear and just create the range. Because oftentimes the range is already known, right? You know how big the visualization needs to be. The answer is yes, because like most every function in D3 returns a function. So if you don't like functional programming, sorry, it's actually what I learned on, so I'm pretty well used to it. So yeah, this all of these methods return the xscale function.
Okay.
So what that typically is done is you create this xscale first with just a range, and then as you get new data in, like I showed you in like the API call, you're going to want to remap the domain to the extent of the new data, right? So that's why you would put the domain after you instantiate basically the xscale. So it's a pretty common pattern that you'll see in a lot of visualizations, and those are typically ones that are responding to new data because you need to reset the domain every time you get that new data. So, but yeah, like I said, all these functions return functions basically. So xscale in itself is a function. That's why we can pass in the value of 0 and get the pixels back. The y scale would be identical. A lot of times you'll see ordinal on the x and linear on the y. But this is just a quick example. So another great thing that D3 has, and if you've ever worked with SVG path strings, you know you cannot read them very well. At least I can't. D3 will take very nicely formatted JSON arrays and convert them into that horrendously ugly SVG path string. And it does it via very simple syntax. We need our scales again, and you basically call the SVG line function. And I'm really sorry, let me see if I can actually. Yeah, that works good. So in the line function, you basically just have to tell it how to get the x values, how to get the y values. And what we're doing is we say, for each element in the array, the x value is scaled from our x scale. The y value is scaled via our y scale. And we can pass this new function line, we pass in our data, it will return a string, and this will be the string right here. So you never want to have to compute a path string by yourself in SVG. It would be a nightmare. I can't even make like a triangle sometimes. It takes forever. So with path generators, with scales and with the enter, you could be 90% of the way to making, basic histograms, stacked bar charts, sortable bar charts. This one here sorts automatically. Line charts, this is where that path string would come into play. This is how you would, basically this is an SVG path element, and we use those path generators to create the D string. We put that on there, and we can get a nice line chart that corresponds to our data. You can make basic scatter plots. But if you want to make really cool things, like this zoomable icicle graph, it can come zoom back out. If you want to make maps, this is an unemployment map of the US 2008. You can make, I'm not really sure what you use it for, but it's really cool, satellite projection. I actually there's an API for the space station, and it gives you the lat and lon, and I projected it as a movement. It's kind of cool. It really killed my browser though. You can make a world tour. These are always popular. I've yet to find a really good use for them, but they're fun. The force diagrams. This one's collapsible. This one's kind of cool. This is a force layout, but they have, each foci basically has gravity. So all force layers have gravity, a concept of gravity and charge. Particle can both repel and attract, and you could update each individual particle's charge or gravity based on data. So if you want really awesome particle that you think is all the other particles should attract to, based on the data, because we bound data to it, we can act upon that information and say boost its charge, and we can make stuff like this happen. So it's pretty fun. This is a maze that morphs into basically a tree. Yeah. I don't know. It's a great description. I know. It's just really cool to watch. This is an example Mike Bostock did. The guy's a beast. I don't know. I can't do this stuff. So. I don't know what the benefit is, but it's really, really cool. So, I actually don't even know what it means. Like, I looked those algorithms up and I was like, yeah, that's cool, man.
It's a family tree.
So, and of course, you can do, this one's really cool. This is actually how they, visualization of how they resample line paths for projections. The math, if you go to the source code and look at the geographic projections for D3, the math just makes my head hurt. He has another partner who helps out with the code in England named Jason Davies, and also a beast. So this is a pretty cool visualization of an algorithm. It basically shows like how they resample points to create a smooth line as opposed to a really jagged line that follows, all the lats and longs. And then of course, you can make cool stuff like this. Shibaroni. I don't know if you guys ever seen like Voronoi diagrams. For those of you who haven't, if you have a bunch of points on a screen, they basically subdivide it into areas where, like the closest point, so if you were standing right here, basically, or if you're standing within this box, then you'll be the closest you can be to this single point. I actually took all the bus stops for Austin and created a Voronoi diagram, and it's kind of cool because it looks like the city, but there's no streets. It's just kind of implied by the bus stops. And then I made it into a T-shirt, and then my girlfriend made fun of me. So. But so you can see, like, when you're in the center, when you can, like, see the whole little doggy's face. So if you want to do, if you want to do that kind of stuff, then there's more components you need that will help you transform your data into something useful that D3 can put on the screen. And those are layouts. Layouts would be the force diagrams that we saw, some of the trees. The geographic projections are obviously going to be for all the mapping. Geometry will cover the Voronoi diagrams, and then transitions is a subset of selections where you can get really, fancy effects, things coming in and off the screen. And for the faint of heart, there are abstraction libraries out there that will lift you up a layer above D3 and allow you to maybe not do the data binds or do some of the hardcore D3 programming. When you just need a bar chart, I recommend you could check out some of these. I don't, just out of spite, but I'm not sure that's always good. So these are some pretty popular libraries. I personally don't have experience with them. Typically roll my own type of thing, I guess you could say, at work, just because a lot of these will get you 80% of the way there, and then that last 20 is the 20 you actually need, and then you might as well just do it yourself. So there's some cool companion libraries. One in particular is called CrossFilter. CrossFilter is a data aggregation library where you can make linked dashboards. So it creates stateful filters on your data that basically they talk to each other. So you can see like this. So these are flight times, the table updates, the arrivals. Everything is being filtered by what I currently have selected. And the filters persist. So you can see this one's filtered, and this one's filtered. And the data responds accordingly. So this is called CrossFilter. Despite what you might have read on the internet, a couple people say you can create charts with CrossFilter. No, you can't. You can't do that. It's only data aggregation, data filtering. Another one is Cubism. all these libraries I'm showing you were made by Mike Bostock, so they plug into D3 very, very well. Cubism is great for time series data. You can see we have new data streaming on. It has a whole backend selection or a framework that I'm actually not even familiar with. I don't use Cubism, but I wanted to. A lot of people are interested in time series visualization. So Graphite and Cube, I've never used them, so I can't give you a whole lot of information on that. But Cubism is out there if this is something you're interested in. And then finally, Topo.json. It's most simply like a command line, and it does have a browser interface, but it drastically reduces the size of GeoJSON files for doing mapping. And I do mean drastically, sometimes upwards of 90% reduction. It does so by finding, it finds the same points on the graph and reduces them and then just into a single point and is able just to apply a projection across all points, and will remap all the data for you. So if you're going to do a lot of mapping, I highly suggest checking out Topo.json. It'll make the load times of large GeoJSON files much better. And so when you're really ready to go, you can check out reusable charts. This is an article, Reusable Charts, here that Mike Bostock wrote about. Basically, okay, you don't want to have to write the same code or do a bar chart every time. So there's this concept of reusable charts that you can use to make a chart that you want to use over and over again. And my job, I use it all the time. Basically, that's all we do because we don't want to write the same chart every time. Or maybe you have a brushed region that you want to reuse with a certain feature. Well, then you can roll that into a reusable component and use it across the board. If you really want to take it up a notch, you can check out reusable charts. That's actually what the book that myself and the co-authors wrote. So if you're interested, you can bump up my royalties from like $20 to like 25 with that code over there. So, or just talk to me too. I can hook you up. So the book it basically covers all that information. It walks you through an example project of some San Francisco metro data, and shows you how you can go from a single standalone chart that you have to recreate every time to an actual reusable component. And then finally, when it's like 3 in the morning and you can't figure it out, and this seems like the worst library ever, then there's a lot of help out there for D3. There's the links here, tutorials, just to give you an idea. These are the tutorials. Well, some of these are linked to in the actual presentation, but there's, like I said, specific techniques, blogs, videos, there's all kinds of information out there. The Google group is very active, like I mentioned. I highly recommend checking it out. Everyone's usually very willing to help. Obviously, Stack Overflow has a D3.js tag that is frequented by one guy in particular, which I'm pretty sure it's his full-time job, because he tried to get a couple points on Stack Overflow, and he was like, every time, just gets sick. So, there's a ton of examples. If you go to GitHub, if you just go to d3js.org, you'll find a link to these. But I mean, if you want to do it, it's been done most likely. So these are some of the examples that are out there. You can actually edit this page if you want to add your own. When you're feeling like really proud or really confident, you can throw your own visualization on there. And then one of the co-authors of the book created this D3.js gallery, and it's searchable. So you can search by author, chart type, title, and so on. So this is really helpful when you're looking for more specific, because the other page isn't very user-friendly, so to speak. This is backed by a Google spreadsheet, so if you feel like you want to, update it, go for it. I actually think I saw one of mine on here earlier, and the link is dead, so that was kind of embarrassing. Oh yeah, this one's cool. I don't know if you guys read the New York Times, but like I said, the creator works for the New York Times. This one was pretty popular. It was live updated. If they win, which state, which way does it go? So, so this was all made with D3. Most things you see on New York Times these days. Bloomberg. I went to a conference last year, and Bloomberg was using it. I know New York Times, obviously. a lot of big players. So I think it's quickly becoming the dominant technology. If it's not used directly, it's probably used as in some form and in a library that they're using to create these. So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do. So that is it for me. Is there any questions out there? Yeah.
How do we get the slides?
The question is how to get the slides. I will send them via you. Okay.
Post them on our Meetup.
Yeah.
Is there rendering or backing support besides SVG, like to Canvas or to other?
Yeah, you can use Canvas. It's a little more cumbersome, but it's out there. For example, the geographic projections can actually go to Canvas directly, so that's quite helpful. But yeah, there's eventually. A lot of people ask me like, how do I, I want to visualize my big data. I'm like, well, don't, because you can't put 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 points on the DOM. And it probably wouldn't do anybody any good anyway. No one can really process that many points or that much data. So try to aggregate it first, but if you're hell-bent on getting that much information on the DOM, then you might need to go to Canvas at that point. At one point, somebody was trying to write a shim that you could write just like you were working with SVG, and that shim would translate it to Canvas automatically. But I don't know where that actually ended up.
So when you're working with D3, all the stuff that goes into the DOM is shadow DOM, right? Before it enters. Kind of
the virtual selection?
Yeah, kind of the same way Angular's shadow DOM works, right?
Yeah. So the question is, is it like a shadow DOM? I've actually never heard that phrase, but basically what it is it creates a virtual selection that isn't an actual DOM element.
Mm-hmm.
So D3 selections are sometimes referred to as an array of elements, DOM elements, but they're actually not. They're a subset of that have specific methods that allow you to interact with them in D3-esque ways, like entering and exiting and updating. So what it does is essentially, if the DOM element's not there, it puts an object in as a placeholder in that selection array and says, you're not there yet, but I know I need to put you there. So once it sees that there's an element there, if it's not a text element and it's an object, it's that virtual element, it knows that it needs to create it with that enter. When we call enter, it's going to take all those guys that don't exist and say, okay, you can go in there.
And that's pretty similar to what Angular does, right?
Yeah, it's a very similar, I feel like they always call theirs like DOM caching. They kind of, when they do like the empty repeats and things, you mean? Yeah.
Is there any way to export those charts into like a PNG or JPEG image of some sort?
The question is there any way to export these charts? So like for printing perhaps, or there is, there's something called SVG Crowbar. It's by another guy at New York Times, Sean Carter. And what it does, it looks for, actually you can use it for any SVG. What it will do is take any SVG on the page and basically take out the SVG and say, here's the SVG, information that you could put into Illustrator or something. Some guys are trying to render the SVGs, for example, in Node or using Phantom.js, using the headless browser, rendering the visualization there because you obviously could, and then because Phantom.js has some pretty good support for printing. But there's not really an elegant solution. I think it was, obviously when it was built, its intention is to live in the browser, but it's certainly a challenge that I know I have to work with at work as well. So, especially in my enterprise environment, printing. Boss wants to see that on paper for some reason. Yeah.
For interactivity, especially user-driven type stuff, in terms of code structures, where do you tend to write those different functions to handle the user input and deal with things like adjusting scales, stuff like that?
Yeah, so typically, let me get up here. Sorry. The question is, how do you deal with user interaction? Where does that code live? And most, it's a slightly more advanced, I guess, topic, but I can certainly show you where I would do it or where I do it. It's typically here in the update selection. So every selection has an on method that obviously isn't here, but I can say on click, on mouse down, on key press. And then that on event is passed in, the first two arguments are the data associated with that element and the index. So what I can do is say on click, if data.name equals Andy, alert Andy. So typically that the on's going to be obviously in, you want that to be in your update selection because you want that to be applied to every element. You can't even put an on an exit because it would make no sense. So. Any more questions? Yeah.
Can you recommend a reference for D3 and D3?
My next meetup, there isn't one.
It only holds 15 people.
Yeah, I know. So if anybody's got space, you know, it'd certainly be nice.
Come back here.
What's that?
You come back here.
Yeah, they're kind of strict on letting us in here. So I guess we're a rough group. I don't know. But yeah, we only hold 15 people, unfortunately. But there aren't too many great references out there for Angular and D3 at the moment. So maybe I should write like a blog post.
I saw a book that was it was like an ebook, and I thought it was one of the Angular gurus. It's like $19. I haven't tried it yet, but I don't know if you're...
Yeah, it's really, if you want to integrate Angular and D3, I recommend learning the reusable pattern. Because that reusable pattern is going to dovetail into Angular directives, and as you get new data, you'll update that reusable chart with the new data. And so really, Angular, Backbone, Ember, if you know the reusable pattern, you can pretty much integrate any of them.
So when is your next D3 meetup?
November 7th.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. We're currently full unless we acquire large space at the moment. So.
Where is it?
It's on South Lamar, Barton Springs, right across from Uchi, so right at that intersection. Yeah, so it's surprisingly hard to find space for.
Talk to me about space, 2 blocks from here.
Certainly, we'll do. Cool.
Did it just move?
What's that? I'll let you know. If you see the wait list go away, then it moved. So. Cool.
Hey, thanks, Andy. That was awesome. And obviously, we actually have the room until 9, so if you guys want to stick around and ask a few more questions, feel free to do that. I also wanted to mention that typically after the meetups, a few of us at least wander over to Buffalo Billiards, which is just 1 block over on 6th and Brazos. So if anyone is interested, head over there. And Andy, are you going or not?
Yeah, I'll probably go.
So Andy may go, I'll be there. Feel free to come do that if you want. Otherwise, no hard feelings. I mentioned before we're going to be skipping the holidays, but we'll be getting back together for this meetup in January. So anyone who's new, if you enjoyed it, definitely join the group. And just in the last few minutes, does anyone have any sort of announcements or anything? We usually go around and say if anyone's hiring or looking or anything like that, real quick. But if anyone has anything, now would be a good time. Yeah.
I'm looking for, hey, I'm with Whole Foods and we're looking for junior and senior PHP developers.
Any particular framework?
No. No particular framework. Testing is a plus. And Mongo.
No particular framework. Hello. No particular framework, just PHP generally and Mongo, you said?
Yep.
Cool. So talk to him if that sounds interesting. Anyone else?
I just like to get Andy to show his URL for your book.
Oh yeah, sorry.
The URL for the book.
I'll email it. It's active for a while, so.
Yeah, so any of the information here, as I mentioned, my slides and all the meetup info is already online, and so I will link somehow to Andy's stuff after the fact and post a note in the meetup page or whatever, and that'll include the discount code for his book. And then if you guys still have any questions that are not answered at that point, just post a note in the meetup page. Anything else?
Hey, quick one. So,
yes.
I know you mentioned that from PayPal we're looking at developers, hiring those. I'm also looking for a QA person that has a very developer-centric mindset. Or basically we have combined teams, so I need somebody who can test and do automation tests, but also wants to develop as well.
Okay, so normally I would limit the announcements, but since PayPal paid for the pizza, I will let him have the extra announcement. But he basically, for anyone who didn't hear, in addition to Node developers, they're also looking for developer-minded QA folks, right?
Yep.
So if that fits the bill. Anyone else? Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot for coming out, especially those of you who are new, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.